There was blood on the pavement when I arrived. Smoke was still rising from the wrecked car. It had twisted like a broken jaw. People were screaming. Someone was dragging a half-conscious man away from the flames. And through that chaos, through the sirens, the panic, the heat, I saw him standing in my driveway, holding a clipboard, pretending nothing was wrong. A stranger on my land. A man from the HOA. And behind him, a row of houses that didn't exist 3 months ago. He didn't look at the crash. He didn't look at the injured. He looked at me, like I was trespassing on his property. In that moment, I realized something was deeply wrong. Not just corruption, not just greed, something colder, something engineered and buried under layers of legal theft. You're going to want to know how this happened. But before I tell you how I took everything back, every house, every inch of soil, every brick they stole, you need to understand something. Every second you're not paying attention, someone like them is taking something that belongs to you. Stay until the end, and I'll show you how 100 families woke up one morning owning nothing, and how the ones who built this nightmare never saw the reversal coming. My name is Alex, and this is the story of how the HOA built 100 homes on my land, and how I watched them finish. Before taking every last piece of it back, I live on the edge of a small town in Arizona, on a stretch of land people used to call dead soil, the kind of place nobody paid attention to until someone realized silence can be mined, paved, and sold in pieces. For years I watched developers crawl across the state like locusts, buying everything they could, hollowing it out, flipping it, and wrapping it in glossy brochures that made strangers believe asphalt was freedom. I bought my land before that wave hit, back when it was nothing but some bleached gravel, old fence posts, and the bones of cattle long forgotten by anyone except the desert itself. I didn't choose it because it was profitable. I chose it because it was mine in a literal, primal, ancient way. A place where the earth didn't talk back, didn't argue, didn't steal. The closest neighbor was miles away, and I liked it that way. Because silence is rare in a world where everyone wants access, leverage, or rent. For a long time, that silence was the only thing I trusted. But silence is also the space where predators move first. The first hint that something was wrong came disguised as a harmless letter. A generic envelope with no return address, no signature, just a flimsy sheet pretending to be survey coordination for future community enhancement. The kind of bureaucratic camouflage that only looks harmless if you've never seen how quietly land theft begins. I didn't reply to it because I didn't owe them anything. Not my time, not my explanation, not my permission. A month later a second letter arrived, thicker, more official looking, pretending to sound like a courtesy notification about a zoning review that I never requested and never authorized. They didn't ask, they declared. And that's when something clicked. Not fear yet, just the faint static of intrusion, like a wire humming behind drywall where there shouldn't be power. Then the surveyors came. They didn't knock, they didn't call, they didn't ask. They just walked straight onto my land in neon vests like they were measuring a corpse for burial. I remember the taste of that moment. Metallic, slow, unreal. The realization that the trespass wasn't a mistake. It was a test. I confronted them, and they pretended not to hear me at first, like I was background noise to their blueprint. When I forced their attention, they told me they had preliminary approval from municipal coordination with the HOA directive, a sentence that sounded like someone cut a hostage note from corporate press releases. There was no HOA here. There had never been one. Which meant something worse. They were acting as if one already existed, as if the future had already replaced the present. And I was just a character refusing to accept the rewrite. I threw them off my land that day, but predators never retreat on the first shove. They just take new measurements. The next week the letters turned into legal notices. Vague threats disguised as development advisories, filled with language engineered to sound final. Annexation review, partial jurisdiction, parcel reassignment. It was war, but wrapped in paperwork so sterile it almost passed as polite. That's the trick of modern theft. It doesn't break into your house, it mails you a memo about how it already lives there. Most people don't know this until it's too late, but there are only two ways land gets stolen now: at gunpoint or by committee. One leaves bodies, the other leaves signatures. The second kind is harder to fight because it wears a suit and calls itself progress. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. Lawyers are for when something has already happened. I realized what I had to do was simpler but far colder. I had to let them show their teeth. Because if you swing too early, There's no record of the bite. So I waited. Not because I was powerless, but because I knew they believe I was. Predators relax when they think the animal is already dying. Weeks passed, machinery arrived, foundations appear where the desert used to breed, and trucks moved in like ants building a throne for a queen no one voted for. The first house frame went up in silence. Then another, then 10. No permits nailed to posts, no construction markers. Just momentum without consent. Momentum that assumed I would break before they ran out of lumber. People ask why I didn't stop it right then, why I didn't file the injunction the moment the first post touched my soil. The answer is simple. Stopping them early would have only saved them money. Early interference would have turned theft into a misunderstanding. But when they finish a crime, when they pour concrete, erect walls, bring in residents, and hang flags, that's no longer construction. That's evidence. They weren't building homes. They were building a future lawsuit with my name matched into every brick. The deeper truth, the one I didn't say out loud at the time, is that I wasn't just angry. I was patient in the way a loaded spring is patient. There's a difference between resistance and strategy. And strategy is the kind of revenge that waits until the target can walk away. By month 4, they weren't building houses anymore, they were building a fictional reality. A neighborhood that only existed on paper until they decided to drag my land into their illusion by force. Roads were paved across property they didn't own. Street signs went up. Tower lines extended over soil that still legally belonged to me. They didn't just cross a line, they erased it. I watched it all from my porch every morning like a man sitting at the edge of his own crime scene, waiting for the last fingerprint to dry. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't development, it was colonization with better branding. I watched them like a predator studies the herd from the shadows. Every morning, I stepped onto my porch and surveyed the perimeter, the trucks, the scaffolds, the workers buzzing like insects over my land. My name is Alex, and they thought I was powerless. They didn't know the patient fire smoldering beneath calm skin. Every plank they raised, every nail they hammered, whispered their arrogance. I let them parade their conquest. Every day, I reminded myself, patience was a weapon. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't even shout. I just observed. They were predators thinking they were kings. They were my prey. Coming up, you'll see how their overconfidence started to cost them. I learned their routines. The foreman smoked by the first fence at 7:03 a.m., a coffee cup in one hand, a clipboard in the other. Workers arrived in waves, trucks rolling like tides, machinery groaning like ancient beasts. I noted it all. I noted who came late, who glanced around nervously, who whispered too loudly. I noted because every detail was a thread in the trap I was weaving. I am Alex, and these people were building their fantasy on my land, not knowing every step was catalogued, every misstep remembered. Coming up, someone would try to hide their mistake, but there was nowhere left to hide. At night, I walked the boundaries. The cool desert wind carried the smell of sawdust and gasoline from their illegal construction. Shadows stretched long, folding over the foundations. I saw shapes moving in the moonlight, figures inspecting, measuring, plotting. I didn't interrupt. I didn't signal. I was watching. I am Alex, and in every shadow, I felt their hubris trembling. They believed they were untouchable. They were wrong. Coming up, you'll see how I exploited a single careless action. Then came the first resident. A family moved in without my consent, believing the HOA could own a home built on land that wasn't theirs. I watched them unload boxes, laugh, and make plans, blissfully unaware that their foundation sat on someone else's reality. I am Alex, and the sight of them settling in lit a different fire. Not rage, not panic, but the sharp anticipation of justice coming like a predator's leap. Coming up, the first small crack would appear, and I would be ready to pounce. Every encounter with the foreman was a game. He nodded, smiled, pretended courtesy, but every glance was a challenge. They thought they controlled the narrative. I controlled the story. Every paper, every call to the HOA, every quiet question I asked the local officials was a thread in a net they didn't know they were walking into. I am Alex, and the net was closing slowly. Coming up, one bad decision would start the collapse. I started leaving small traces, legal notices, letters, inspections that arrived by accident. Each was a seed of panic, planting doubts they could not yet name. I watched them read, reread, whisper, glance over shoulders. I am Alex, and patience sharpened my instincts. They were hunters in my home, but hunters who didn't know they were being hunted. Coming up, one careless foreman would tip the scale. Rumors started among the construction crews. They whispered about ownership, boundaries, and paperwork they didn't understand. I let the rumors grow. I am Alex, and I learned that fear is often louder than anger. Coming up, someone would start questioning loyalty, and I would be ready to strike at the precise moment. I walked past the half-built houses at dusk, windows without glass, doors leaning against walls, shadows in every room. The desert light painted them in false glory. I imagined the families inside, believing themselves safe, while the legal steel of my patients coiled around their necks. I am Alex, and they didn't even feel the tightening. Coming up, the first confrontation would make them wish they had left when they had the chance. I knew the HOA's lawyers would eventually call, confident their paper empire was unassailable. I let the phone ring. I let them make assumptions. Every word I recorded, every tone analyzed. I am Alex, and every syllable they thought was a threat they controlled was a promise I intended to fulfill in my own timing. Coming up, one conversation would reveal their blind spot. I started documenting everything. Photographs of the land, every construction mark, every boundary encroachment. They thought they were invisible. I am Alex, and invisibility is a weapon when paired with patience and knowledge. Coming up, the evidence would be unstoppable. Every step I took, I reminded myself, the goal was not just to stop them, but to let them finish. Every house completed would be another piece of undeniable proof that my victory would be absolute. I am Alex, and this is how hunters teach respect. Coming up, the first domino would fall, and no one would see it coming. I noticed it first at dawn, the foreman arriving later than usual. My name is Alex, and every second counts. In the desert, seconds are sharper than nights. The sun had just begun to bleed into the horizon, and shadows stretched long across the foundations. I watched him fumble with his clipboard, glance at the workers nervously, as if some part of him sensed a trap tightening. Coming up, one slip, and everything they believed was theirs would start to crumble. The crew was busy, oblivious to the signals I had planted in subtle ways. Markings in dirt, a misplaced pile of boards, a door leaning slightly off its hinges. I am Alex, and sometimes chaos looks like an accident, until it isn't. Every movement they made, every step they took, reinforced the illusion of control they clung to. They thought they were untouchable. Coming up, they were about to learn that confidence has a shadow, and I was standing in it. By mid-morning, the first family had noticed something off. Doors didn't close properly. Measurements didn't match the plans. I observed from the edge of the property line. Quiet, invisible. I am Alex, and they had no idea who was watching them, or why. The foreman argued with a worker over a measurement, their voices rising. Tension thickened like heat over asphalt. Coming up, the first real confrontation was inevitable. I left small clues, a legal form left on a truck. An inspection request by mistake slipped into the foreman's bag. I am Alex, and every mistake, no matter how small, would echo later in a courtroom filled with proof. Workers whispered, sensing a presence, an unseen judgment. They didn't know it was me. Coming up, one careless whisper would reveal more than they intended. By noon, the sun hammered down. The families settled in their temporary homes, unaware that I had every movement documented. I am Alex, and patience isn't passive, it's deliberate. Every smile, every box carried, every child running through the empty frame was part of the story I was building. Coming up, when the first domino fell, no one would understand why the collapse seemed sudden. I started sending anonymous warnings, small, threatening letters to the HOA offices. Nothing explicit, just enough to stir doubt. I am Alex, and doubt is a predator's whisper in the night. They looked at their documents, checked boundaries, called lawyers. Confusion spread, but they didn't know why. Coming up, a single miscalculation would create a crack that would widen beyond repair. The foreman grew erratic. Meetings were held in hurried tones, calls placed in secrecy. I watched from the trees near the property line, hidden by the desert scrub. I am Alex, and when someone believes they are alone, they often reveal what they fear most. Coming up, one exposed secret would spark a chain reaction. I approached the edge of the construction at dusk, as the families returned from work and school. The first child ran past me, oblivious. I am Alex, and life continues while predators stalk. Workers glanced over their shoulders, sensing tension, but unable to name it. I let them stew in that uncertainty. Coming up, The first panic would be real, and it would be mine to orchestrate. At night, the desert cooled, shadows lengthened. I checked my cameras, my notes, the subtle markings I had made weeks ago. Iron malice and foresight is as sharp as a knife in a quiet hand. One small oversight by the foreman, one moment of hubris, and the illusion of safety for the residents would shatter. Coming up, the trap would begin to close in a way they never imagined. I walked past the foundations in the moonlight, noting every detail, imagining every consequence. Iron malice, and every step they thought invisible was catalogued. Every whispered argument would become testimony. Coming up, when the first domino fell, the world would see that planning and patience are weapons as lethal as any hammer. The night ended with a final check, trucks in place, doors misaligned, measurements slightly off. Iron malice, and tomorrow, everything would start. They believed they controlled the land, but I controlled the timing. Coming up, the first act of my retaliation was about to unfold, and it would leave them questioning every choice they had made. I decided to strike where paper met pride. Iron malice, they thought their lawyers were shields. They thought signatures were absolutes. They thought a stamped envelope was the same as truth. I watched them from the mailbox that first morning when a courier arrived with a stack of documents, thicker than anyone needed. The HOA directory, new deeds, a string of approvals with dates that matched the sunrise. I held the envelopes in my hands and felt the weight of organized theft. Coming up, the first legal lie would be exposed. I started small, not because small was safe, but because small taught them to flinch. I sent a certified notice contesting the boundary lines, quoting a survey from 30 years ago that no one had bothered to read. Iron malice, I signed with my name and my patience. The HOA's office clerk called me a nuisance. The foreman laughed about that old man on the hill. They had a story in mind, a predictable villain. I let them keep that story. Coming up, their certainty was the scaffold of their downfall. Then a letter arrived from a local title company with a polite tone and a polite lie. We have confirmed proper chain of title. My blood ran cold for a moment. Iron malice, but panic is loud and often sloppy. I read every line until midnight. The letter quoted an intermediate memorandum that did not actually exist. It quoted an easement that stopped 15 years earlier. It quoted a deed that had been superseded. I knew the gaps because I had stared at the land records for months like a man memorizes a face he plans to remind the world about. Coming up, one forged line would bring a tide of questions nobody had planned for. I hired a surveyor who owed me a favor. He walked the property with the kind of quiet that makes men nervous. Iron malice, the new surveyor found what I already knew. Imprecise pins, move stakes, a suspicious cluster of signatures that didn't match handwriting samples. He found a buried marker the HOA's paperwork had conveniently ignored. He found a gap in the recorded boundaries that matched the very axis their houses now sat on. I took these findings and I did something they didn't expect. I published them quietly. I put the evidence in the mail to the title company, to the municipal planning office, and to a single local paper that loved a scandal. Coming up, when the paper bit, their calm would fracture. People who build on lies assume silence. They assume the land will not speak. The paper I mailed woke something. An editor called the HOA for comment. The HOA produced a statement full of legalese and contempt. They called me a local agitator. They called the reporters sensationalists. Iron malice. I watched their words and catalogued the arrogance. When they answered with venom, they revealed a desperation beneath the polish. Coming up, desperation stains the cleanest shirts. Their lawyers started emailing me with thinly veiled threats. Cease and desist. Unfounded claims. Legal action for harassment. The language looked like a club. Iron malice. So I took their club and photographed its grain. I recorded phone calls where their counsel sounded rushed. I requested copies of permits they swore were pulled in good faith and found blank pages. I began to assemble a legal mosaic. Every dishonest paragraph they wrote became a piece I could reflect in court. Coming up, one false statement would be the mirror that shattered their entire case. While the paper ran a short piece that made front-page whispers, word traveled through the neighborhood like wind. The new residents gathered in a cluster of porches and barbecues and children's laughter. The HOA sent emissaries with reassurances and polite denials. One woman, a neighbor with tired eyes, walked up to my property line and asked what I wanted. I told her the truth. She replied with a mixture of anger and terror. We paid for these houses. My kids go to school here. Iron malice. I told her I understood. I told her I would make sure the truth came out. Coming up. Truth would be both a salvation and a knife. At an HOA meeting called to calm the residents, the foreman stood at the podium and rehearsed a script about compliance and community. He smiled like a man who had rehearsed excuses as a choir practices songs. I sat in the back row and watched his smile crack when a reporter, in the front, asked for proof of an easement. The foreman's voice shook for the first time. Ian Malix. I felt a tremor that wasn't from the desert heat. Coming up. A single question would cause a cascade of doubt. The town inspector walked my property line after the article. He scratched his head at odd measurements and at a map that looked more like an argument than evidence. He called his supervisor. The supervisor called the county office. Ian Malix. Paper calls paper. When institutions interrogate institutions, the sound is like glass rubbing glass. Coming up. Bureaucracy would, unexpectedly, become an ally. Then the HOA did something reckless. They filed a preemptive quiet title action in the county court. They tried to turn my patients into a liability, trying to claim I had sat idle for too long. They wanted the judge to see possession as the only fact that mattered. I read the filing and felt the cold novelty of legal arrogance. Ian Malix. They were betting on human forgetfulness, on the idea that a judge sees houses and occupants and assumes ownership follows occupancy. Coming up. They would learn that the law also listens to history and to proof. I prepared for their move. My surveyor's maps were bound. My copies of the letters, the forged memorandum, the title gaps, all organized. I hired an attorney who did not wear a tie but wore teeth. He sat with me and mapped how we would make the record speak. Ian Malix. We would not shout, we would show. We would present the truth so plainly that even the complacent would blink. Coming up. Court would become the stage where their hubris would be dismantled piece by piece. On the eve of the hearing, I walked through the foundations in the moonlight and felt the weight of anticipation. They had built with arrogance, I had built with patience. Ian Malix. In the silence before the storm, even the desert seemed to hold its breath. Coming up. Tomorrow, witnesses would speak and the quiet would rupture into proof. The morning of the hearing, I woke before the sun. Ian Malix. My land, my patience, my plan. Every piece of it aligned in a precise, quiet geometry. I walked past the half-built houses, noting small irregularities, doors still misaligned, windows with frames slightly askew. Every mistake was a seed. Every seed was about to bloom into consequence. Coming up. The first domino would fall, and I would make sure they felt its weight. I entered the courthouse with the calm of someone who knows the storm is theirs, not mine. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, the air thick with the assumption that their signatures, their occupancy, their polished excuses, would matter more than the law. Ian Malix. I was about to teach arrogance its proper scale. Coming up. The first witness would crumble under the truth I had catalogued for months. The HOA's attorney strutted in, a man used to compliance, used to nodding judges, used to walking into rooms where the word ownership was assumed rather than proven. I watched him. I studied his posture, his gestures, the twitch of his left eye when he thought I wasn't looking. Ian Malix. He believed he controlled the narrative. He didn't even realize he was standing on the stage I had already set. Coming up. His confidence would be the rope that bound him. The first witness was the foreman. He swore he believed in the legitimacy of the construction, in the chain of commands, in the HOA's authority. I had already recorded his casual lies, the misquotes, the false signatures he had relied on. Ian Malix. The truth waited in the folds of his testimony like a predator crouched in tall grass. Coming up. One contradictory answer would unravel everything he built. I produced the surveyor's report. I held it high for the court to see. Every shifted pin, every ignored boundary, every falsified memorandum was laid bare. Ian Malix. Silence fell over the courtroom like heavy curtains. The foreman's face paled. I could see the calculation in his eyes. What he had believed safe, now fragile. Coming up. The first legal crack would appear, and no one could patch it fast enough. Residents of the new homes watched from the gallery, their mouths open, their children clutching their hands, eyes wide at the revelation. Ian Malix. Every question they asked themselves. Why did this happen? How is this possible? Only amplified the power of what I was doing. Coming up. Understanding would be there and doing. The judge examined the documents, flipping pages, scrutinizing every reference. I remained calm, measured, the embodiment of patience paying off. Ian Malix. My hand did not shake. My voice did not waver. Every inch of this courtroom became a battlefield where evidence was my weapon, and truth was my shield. Coming up, when the gavel fell, it would echo through every wall the HOA had ever built. During cross-examination, the foreman faltered repeatedly. I asked questions only the prepared liar could answer incorrectly. Every hesitation, every stumble was recorded in the minds of the judge, the jury, and the residents. Ian Malik's, the predator does not rush, it lets the prey trap itself. Coming up, a single overlooked lie would trigger a chain reaction that no one could stop. The HOA's lawyers scrambled. They tried to introduce paperwork they claimed was original. I countered with certified copies and timestamps that made their claims meaningless. Ian Malik's, the room shifted. The arrogance of the HOA was cracking. The foundation of their assumed victory exposed for all to see. Coming up, their panic would become their testimony. When the final arguments were made, I spoke last. Calm, precise, controlled. I reminded the court that occupancy does not equal ownership, that signatures can be forged, and that every inch of land they had trespassed on legally remained mine. Ian Malik's silence fell heavier than any shout. Coming up, the gavel would make the only sound that mattered. The judge adjourned briefly before delivering a decision. The foreman's confident smirk faded with each passing minute. I watched him, knowing he felt the weight of months of deceit collapsing around him. Ian Malik's, and in that moment, patience and planning had transformed into action. Coming up, when the courtroom returned, the reversal would be complete. When the judge finally spoke, it was as if the room exhaled a collective shock. Every house built without proper authority, every inch of my land, every deceitful signature, rendered null. Ian Malik's, the residents could not believe it. The HOA could not believe it. Coming up, the real work of reclamation was only beginning. The papers were signed, orders delivered, and notice given to the residents. The property legally belonged to me. Ian Malik's, and while the gavel's echo faded, the weight of what was to come settled in. Coming up, eviction was next, and it would be swift and undeniable. The moment the court ruled in my favor, the world didn't explode. It whispered. Ian Malik's, the papers were crisp, the ink still wet, yet the gravity of ownership pressed against my chest like a living thing. I walked back across the desert soil I had defended silently for months, feeling the cool sand beneath my boots, imagining every house as a pawn waiting to topple. Coming up, eviction notices would turn theory into reality. I drafted every notice personally, every word deliberate. Ian Malik's, they would not just be letters, they would be the first hammer, striking the pillars of assumed ownership. Each notice was sent to every home, each stamped with legal authority, and each accompanied by instructions, vacate or face immediate enforcement. Coming up, panic would spread faster than I ever needed to push. The foreman tried to negotiate. I listened through the phone with quiet amusement. Ian Malik's, his voice carried desperation, and every plea revealed more weakness than strength. Can we settle? Delay? Compromise? He asked. I let him speak. I let him dig the hole. Coming up, one call would make the first resident break. The residents were confused at first. Boxes stacked in driveways, questions whisper over fences. Ian Malik's, they didn't realize that legality is more powerful than empathy. When someone has prepared the battlefield, I had given them time, yes, but not mercy. Coming up, the first knock on a door would bring clarity and shock. I walked the property as they packed. Children clung to parents, unaware of the invisible line separating ownership from occupancy. Ian Malik's, I did not celebrate. I observed. Every reaction was data. Every glance, every question, a measure of human response under pressure. Coming up, one family would resist, and their resistance would teach a lesson. The HOA tried to intervene, filing late appeals, desperate motions, claims of miscommunication. I read every document with a predator's eye. Ian Malik's, none of it mattered. Evidence, timing, legal precedents, all stacked in my favor. Their panic was predictable. Coming up, one failed motion would cost them everything they had assumed was secure. Doors opened, and the first family stepped outside with their belongings, faces pale, hands shaking. Ian Malik's, I watched from the edge of my land, maintaining distance but absorbing every emotion. Their lives had been upended legally, but the execution of justice was calm, precise, inevitable. Coming up, the foreman would witness the collapse of his empire and feel in a way he never imagined. Neighbors who at once smiled at the construction crews now whisper, some sympathetic, some fearful. Ian Malik's. The streets were lined with moving vans, tacked cars, and the echoes of shattered assumptions. Coming up, the HOA would feel the weight of every misjudged decision. I coordinated with law enforcement to ensure smooth transitions. No chaos, no violence, just a clear, legal transfer. Ian Malik's. Even the families who had resisted compliance realized that the law was absolute and impartial, and my planning had left no gaps. Coming up, one last confrontation was still inevitable. The foreman arrived at the first house, expecting compliance, expecting negotiation. I met him at the edge of the property. Ian Malik's. Silence hung between us like a loaded gun. No words were necessary. The deeds, the evidence, the months of strategy spoke for themselves. Coming up, he would understand, too late, that he had been a character in my story, not the author. As the day ended, trucks loaded with belongings rolled down the streets I now owned. Ian Malik's. The desert stretched wide, unbroken, silent, except for the hum of human comprehension finally catching up to law. Every house was empty, every assumption shattered, every false claim erased. Coming up, the aftermath would reveal the true cost of arrogance. By sunset, all residents had vacated. I walked across the empty streets, touching the walls, the doorframes, the foundations that had once been the setting of false security. Ian Malik's. Victory was mine, but the taste of it was not triumph. It was acknowledgement of control earned, patience rewarded, and justice executed. Coming up, the next challenge was ensuring no one ever tried this again. Even the HOA's lawyers arrived late, realizing that their claims were moot, that their threats were hollow. Ian Malik's. They had underestimated patience, preparation, and precision. Coming up, there would be consequences beyond legal rulings, consequences that extended into reputation, authority, and respect. As night fell, I walked the perimeter once more. The desert cooled, the stars stretched infinitely, and I understood fully the gravity of what had been accomplished. Ian Malik's. The land was mine. Every structure, every inch, every principle, restored. Coming up, reflection would teach the lessons no courtroom could enforce. The morning after the evictions, the streets were silent. Ian Malik's. Every house stood empty, every lawn untouched, every street lamp casting shadows like witnesses. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was charged. The absence of people echoed louder than any argument I had ever had in court. Coming up, the real reactions were about to unfold. I walked the neighborhood slowly, inspecting each property as though it were a crime scene. Ian Malik's. There was no laughter, no cars, no movement, just the ghost of what had been. The neighbors, once loud with complaints or complaints masked as civility, were now absent, replaced by the heavy weight of legality executed perfectly. Coming up, some of them would not take the loss quietly. The HOA was frantic. Emails, calls, threats, all meaningless. Ian Malik's. Every attempt to recover ground was futile. Their arrogance had been their undoing. And yet, they sent inspectors, trying to find some loophole, some technicality that would undo what had already been done. Coming up, their desperation would create the first real misstep. I overheard one of their lawyers whispering into the phone, voice low, panicked. We underestimated him. Every signature, every note. He's prepared for everything. Ian Malik's. And yes, they finally realized that patience and planning were weapons they had no defense against. Coming up, the first public humiliation was already brewing. The families had scattered, trying to understand what had happened. Some cried in cars, some argued with moving companies, some just stared at empty driveways. Ian Malik's. And I walked among them, silent, unseen, feeling the gravity of control finally asserted. Coming up, one family would attempt defiance, testing boundaries they had no right to. Social media lit up with stories. HOA disaster, landowner strikes back, 100 homes taken overnight. Ian Malik's. Each post amplified the truth. The story spread faster than any legal memo ever could. The HOA's reputation plummeted, while mine quietly solidified. Coming up, the public eye would be the final witness. I made calls to local authorities, ensuring that enforcement would be smooth. Ian Malik's. Every move calculated. No violence, no chaos, only the slow, methodical reclaiming of what was mine. The crews who built the houses left quietly, heads lowered. Coming up, there would be no return for them. By noon, Journalists were on site, cameras rolling, questions asked, footage captured. Ayan Malik's, I spoke only when necessary, a calm, measured explanation of rights, evidence, and the chain of events that led to this. Each sentence a reminder that the law had been followed, the plan executed, the land restored. Coming up, the foreman would finally realize the depth of his failure. I found the foreman standing in front of a partially constructed home, looking bewildered. Ayan Malik's, he had been the visible face of a strategy that failed. No one was left to cover him, no lawyers could save him now. Coming up, the first confrontation face-to-face would be more powerful than any courtroom. I reminded him quietly, every inch here is mine. Every nail, every bore, every misstep, all documented. Ayan Malik's, his arrogance was gone, his confidence fractured. I didn't raise my voice, I let reality speak. Coming up, the ripple of this humiliation would extend far beyond these streets. The local community watched silently, some in awe, some in anger, some unsure what to believe. Ayan Malik's, and in the quiet observation of human reaction, I understood that power had shifted completely. Coming up, this shift would echo in ways the HOA never imagined. By evening, I walked alone through the empty streets. Ayan Malik's, the desert light softened the concrete and wood, tainting shadows across foundations that now belonged legally to me. No sound, only the faint hum of wind and the sense that justice, executed patiently, carried its own resonance. Coming up, the HOA would seek revenge, but I was ready. Reports began to circulate of failed negotiations, frantic calls to state offices, and attempts to rewrite records. Ayan Malik's, their panic was predictable, but their inability to act decisively gave me the upper hand. Coming up, every desperate move they made would reinforce the permanence of my claim. Night fell. I stood atop a small hill overlooking the empty development. Ayan Malik's, the desert stretched endlessly. Silence, law, and strategy had aligned. The 100 houses, once symbols of trespass, now symbolized proof of preparation, patience, and precision. Coming up, the final chapters of this story were not just legal, they were personal, and they would leave a mark on everyone involved. The HOA didn't give up quietly. Ayan Malik's, they tried to find loopholes, minor clerical errors, any shred of technicality that could undo months of preparation. But I had anticipated every move. Every loophole was covered. Every document double-checked. I knew them better than they knew themselves. Coming up, their last attempt at control was about to fail spectacularly. They hired new attorneys, desperate ones who claimed to be specialists. Ayan Malik's, specialists in their desperation are still predictable. They relied on pressure, intimidation, and frantic deadlines. I countered with patience, evidence, and silence. Coming up, when their first legal attack arrived, it would already be too late. I review every document again, every chain of title, every photograph, every inspection note. Ayan Malik's, knowledge is the ultimate predator's weapon. While they scrambled, I stayed calm, calculating the next move. Coming up, the first domino in their frantic defense would fall, and it would unravel faster than they expected. They filed motions to delay, hoping to buy time, hoping for error. I let them file. Ayan Malik's, time was irrelevant when planning had been complete months ago. Every minute they spent acting without strategy, I spent reinforcing my advantage. Coming up, their rush would become their own trap. Residents who had been displaced called, confused, scared, pleading for clarity. Ayan Malik's, I explained their rights, the process, the timeline. Calm words replaced panic with understanding. Each resident realizing the fairness of the process added pressure on the HOA, without me touching a finger. Coming up, the psychological edge was mine. At the hearing, new attorneys presented arguments filled with tension, jargon, and intimidation. Ayan Malik's, I responded not with anger, but with proof. Documents, surveys, photographs, timestamps. Each word dismantled their narrative. Coming up, the foreman would feel the collapse in real time, and there was no shield for him. The judge listened patiently, reviewing every piece of evidence I had meticulously collected. Ayan Malik's, when the HOA tried to interject, I countered calmly, redirecting attention to the facts. Silence in the courtroom carried more weight than any shouted claim. Coming up, when the ruling came, it would be irreversible. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, sensing the high drama. Ayan Malik's, I did not speak to them. I let the legal documents speak. I let months of planning echo louder than any press release. Coming up, the world would understand that patience and precision outweigh chaos and panic. Finally, the ruling confirmed everything. Ownership, land rights, and legal authority were entirely mine. Ian Malik's, the gavel fell, and the courtroom exhaled in awe. Every house, every plot, every inch of trespassed land reverted to my control. Coming up, enforcement would be swift, and the whole would finally feel the consequences of hubris. I coordinated the formal reclaiming of properties. Law enforcement facilitated legal eviction. Ian Malik's, there was no drama, no necessary confrontation, only justice, executed methodically. Every house cleared, every resident informed, every signature recorded. Coming up, the final confrontation with the foreman was inevitable, and he would understand the full scope of his defeat. At sunset, I walked the empty streets, touching the walls, noting every detail. Ian Malik's, the quiet hum of the desert felt like applause. The HOA's mistakes, arrogance, and failures had all been transformed into a victory carefully earned. Coming up, the final lessons would resonate beyond the court and the land itself. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so. Ian Malik's, every house stood empty, the evidence of my patience and precision visible in every foundation, every corner. The HOA had tried every trick, every delay, every intimidation, yet the law and my preparation had remained unshakable. Coming up, enforcing authority would show them the real meaning of consequences. I walked along the property lines, checking boundaries, marking any remaining discrepancies. Ian Malik's, the land was mine, legally and physically, but maintaining control required vigilance. Every inch, every fence, every pathway had to reflect the authority I had reclaimed. Coming up, the whole would learn that reclaiming power is more than paperwork, it's presence. The residents, now evicted, watched from a distance. Some whispered in disbelief, some in anger, some silently regretted ever moving in. Ian Malik's, their shock, confusion, and fear were the natural results of hubris meeting precision. I let them observe. I did not confront. Coming up, the psychological weight of authority would prove as strong as legal documents. I contacted law enforcement to ensure compliance, but there was no chaos. Ian Malik's, every procedure, every letter, every action had been planned meticulously. The residents moved quietly, knowing resistance was pointless. The HOA had no leverage left. Coming up, one final check would seal the control permanently. At the HOA office, panic had set in. Ian Malik's, emails, phone calls, desperate meetings, none of it mattered. Their pride had crumbled, replaced by the stark reality that their assumptions were false. Coming up, one last attempt at negotiation would fail spectacularly. I review every legal document again, ensuring no errors remained. Ian Malik's, every deed, every boundary marker, every survey had to withstand scrutiny from any angle. The law was now my ally, and preparation my weapon. Coming up, the final residents would leave without dispute. One family resisted slightly, thinking they could negotiate or delay. I met them calmly at the property line. Ian Malik's, I explained clearly, the land is mine, the court has confirmed it, and the eviction is final. No anger, no threats, just clarity. Coming up, compliance would be absolute. The foreman appeared, face pale, hands trembling. Ian Malik's, he had overseen construction, orchestrated bureaucracy, and yet here he stood powerless. Every attempt to explain, every argument, failed against preparation and legality. Coming up, he would witness the full scope of his failure. I walked the streets, observing every house, every corner, every fence. Ian Malik's, the land no longer belonged to anyone else. My presence was enough to enforce authority. Coming up, the whole would finally accept that control had returned completely. By sunset, the last residents had vacated. The last trucks had left. Ian Malik's, silence settled over the streets, not peaceful but absolute. Every house, every structure, every inch of the land was under my ownership and my watchful eye. Coming up, the final act would be reflection, and the consequences for everyone involved would resonate for years. The street was silent. Ian Malik's, every house empty, every window reflecting the desert sun. I walked alone, footsteps echoing softly. The wind carried faint dust. I stopped at the center of the development. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. I breathed. The land was mine. All of it, yet my chest felt tight. I thought of every action, every plan, every moment of patience, Ian Malik's, and still. A shadow lingered. I crouched by the foundation of the largest house. I touched the wood, smooth, untouched, perfectly aligned. I imagined the residents inside, their lives erased in hours. I imagined the foreman, face pale, hands trembling. Ian Malik's. Victory tastes like silence. Victory feels hollow. I whispered to myself, all this time. All of it. And yet nothing prepares you for the quiet after the storm. Ian Malik's. Every step back to the road felt heavier than any courtroom battle. Reflection settled like dust. Then, a sound. Sharp. Unexpected. Behind me. I turned. Nothing. Just shadows. The desert stretched endlessly. The sky deepened. Silence returned. I breathed again. A sudden tremor beneath my feet. Subtle. Almost imperceptible. Then another. And another. Wood creaked somewhere. Metal shifted. Ian Malik's. Heart racing. Mind racing. I ran toward the nearest house. The door swung open. No wind. No hand. Just darkness inside. And then, a nose. Loud. Final. A collapse. Something immense falling. The sound ripped across the streets. I froze. Couldn't move. Couldn't think. Couldn't call anyone. My mind screamed for reason. None came. Ian Malik's. And then, the street swallowed the sound. Houses, walls, foundations, all shook. Dust rose. The desert swallowed it whole. My vision blurred. The ground shifted under me. I took a step back. Another. The tremor ceased. Silence again. Too perfect, too deep, too empty. I looked around. The streets were intact. Yet, something had changed. Something irreversible. The air felt heavier. The land no longer belonged entirely to me, though the papers said it did. Ian Malik's. I took a final breath, and then it happened. A single, sharp sound. Behind me. To my left. To my right. Everywhere. The ground cracked. Shadows moved unnaturally, and the world flipped in an instant. I screamed. And then, nothing.